it seems to me, and I may not have all of their sources of revenue, but we've heard that terrorist groups will do anything for money. They will steal, like the robberies of the banks in Iraq. They will, as Mr. Cassandra talked about, I call that money laundering. I'm a former judge. I call that money laundering, what you were talking about, cooking the books on trade. They make money off of antiquities. They make money off of hostages, and they make money off of their wealthy donors who want to send money to these terrorist groups, and there are probably a whole lot more. Let me try to address a couple of issues. Mrs. Foley, you gave us some remarkable information, and if I understand the current status of American hostage law or procedure, the United States has always had a policy not to pay ransom. Now it's changed that the government won't pay money for ransom, but if families or individuals do, that law will not be enforced as to that payment. Is that your understanding of the current status?
No. Families, you know, in criminal activity, a family has never been prosecuted for paying ransom to criminals who have a loved one.
That's what I'm asking. So as far as you know, no family's ever been required to.
No, I know that because we researched it, because we finally realized we were on our own and we had to try to raise a ransom. But of course we wanted to protect anyone, you know, who would care to help us. So there's no precedent for that, sir.
So that portion of the law, as the President has said, is not being enforced as to prosecute families that
well, it really was never meant to prosecute families. It was meant to prosecute any groups that might pretend to be a charity and instead give money to finance terrorism or something. It was never meant to be.
Was your son kidnapped for ransom, or was he kidnapped as a propaganda tool, or both?
That's a good question. Only God would know what might have been in their heads. He was a Westerner. They don't check passports when they kidnap people, sir. You know, he was obviously a Westerner. He'd been in and out of Syria. He'd been there over a year. More and more of the jihadists had come in 2012. Jim had made very good relations with a lot of the family there, was trying to expose the atrocities of the Assad regime. So felt, you know, protected. A lot of the rebels really welcomed journalists early on so that their plight might get out to the world. But some people...
He was used as a propaganda tool too, though, wasn't he?
I think initially they wanted to make money off of him.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. The propaganda only came when our government would not engage in any way. Nobody would negotiate for him. No one cared. So they thought, well, hey, we can make a spectacle of this. We can really get a lot of PR out of killing these Americans.
Dr. Weinberg, let me ask you some questions about the Gulf states. I'm going to be real specific here. Probably going to hurt somebody's feelings in the Gulf states. We have a military base in Qatar that we use to fly aircraft in the Middle East when we are engaged in military activities in Afghanistan or Iraq. Is that right?
That is correct.
So Qatar helps us out with that. But we know that Qatar has donors there, wealthy donors, who give money to terrorist groups. Is that correct?
It's certainly been correct in the past.
Do we know who those donors are? Do we know their name, rank, and serial number, so to speak?
The United States has sanctioned a number of Qatari nationals.
What does that mean? Don't do this anymore? I mean, what is a sanction against a national in Qatar who gives money to terrorist groups?
That's exactly the problem, sir.
Don't do anything. Don't do it again. It's not nice.
And the problem is that the local government often doesn't do anything about it. In fact, I've seen not a single indication of Qatar prosecuting anybody and convicting them under terror finance laws that have been on the books.
Do we pay to have our military base in Qatar?
No, the Qataris pay for it.
Okay. So you think Qatar's playing both sides?
I think Qatar is absolutely playing both sides in this regard, and I think the United
States... So they
States
harbor people who give money to terrorist groups, but they also have a military base where the United States can go and attack terrorist groups.
Yes, and individuals the United States has sanctioned live just down the road from where this U.S. base is, and if the United States chose to do so, it would not be too difficult to launch airstrikes if we were convinced, or conduct some sort of operation.
You mentioned that the United States has the authority to go after these people who are contributing to foreign terrorist organizations.
If it chooses to use that capacity, it's hard to envision.
To your knowledge, this is my last question.
Please.
To your knowledge of those different, I have two questions.
Yeah.
How many people are we talking about that are contributing money to terrorist groups?
The people sanctioned in Qatar, you can count them on a single hand.
It's not very many.
Yeah.
And second, have we ever extradited, prosecuted, or taken out somebody who is giving money to terrorist groups, to your knowledge?
Have we ever prosecuted, extradited? Well, the United States sought to capture Khalid Sheikh Mohammed from Qatari territory in the 1990s. He was a senior al-Qaeda operative responsible for attacks linked to the 1993.
Did we ever get him?
He, according to former U.S. officials cited in press reports, a senior Qatari, either royal family member or government official, tipped him off, and he fled the country when we went to try and catch him.
So my question is, just answer the question. Have we ever captured, extradited, brought back one of these money bag guys who are giving money to terrorist groups to the United States to prosecute them?
Well, ultimately, we caught KSM himself, who was a senior money man as well as operational man, but we did it in Pakistan.